who are you though? Who are you? Who is like where's the little kid inside you? Where's the kid that got knocked down on the playground? Where's the kid that that's what's interesting, is like seeing people negotiate their way through their life. To me, that's what it is. And I think that's what's interesting to me. I think probably why I chose this profession. What makes people tick, And it's just, as an actor, you get to not only ask them with your mind, but you actually get to jump into their bodies for a little bit and actually feel it.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Matthew Del Negro is an actor. He sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work.
Do you have a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process for a role? Here's a quote. This is a question that you claim you ask yourself. What am I going through right now that can be infused into this character? And what can I learn from this character and his journey? You say, these questions start to shift my awareness of the character from being out there to being part of me. When I read this, man, I was thinking, this is what a lot of these interviews have been leading toward. It's not just finding the character and portraying it. It is finding something in yourself to connect with it in this weird energetic way that I think you're talking about here.
Yeah.
But tell me how much of this is really still true. Is this your first part of your process?
I would say, first of all, to give credit where credit is due, that's kind of Kim Gillingham, an acting coach that I've worked with in LA, and then her protege, Amanda Lovejoy Street. So I got that from Kim originally, would say, why did this script hurtle through the universe and land on your lap right now? Like, what are you going through in your life, struggling with in your life, that you can fuse into this character? And what is the character going through in this story that you can learn from or pick up as part of you? So it's like, what's your jumping off point? And that was another, Ron Van Loo, who I studied with here a long time ago, used to say, like, what's your jumping off point? So I think I think why I gravitated toward that way of thinking about it is it just, to me, feels like very brass tacks. It's a way of taking this writer's work and honoring it and being an interpreter, but it's always going to be filtered through Matt Del Negro. I mean, I could play some character that is on the surface very different from me, but in some way, shape, or form, the only eyes and ears and brain that I have that's gone through this earth before I got to this project were mine. So who else's interpretation is going to be? So you can't, that's the elephant in the room. If you ignore how you respond to the material. Now, if you just stop it right there and you don't do any further work, then you're kind of always playing you in these different situations, which might get kind of, maybe there's not going to be a lot of range. But I do think you have to bring yourself to every role. And I also think that every role kind of adds a new piece to you if you let it in some way.
I always approach this for, if I had the role, if I have the script, me in my fearful self, all of a sudden I'm scared out of my mind. Like the first thing is just fear. How do I do this right? How do I do this right? How do I do this right? Let me flip through. How do I do this? How am I going to do this right? Get the lines down. It feels like what you're saying here is like that kind of cuts that off, and there's another process at work initially forget right or wrong. Like why, like you're saying, why is this script huddling through the universe and landing on me right now? Oh, wait, wow. That's a different way to look at it. Like, wait, this is meant to be? I'm going to mess this up. No. It's here. It's yours.
Yeah. Overall, it does start with that question, kind of what's my jumping off point? That's a kind of a good place to start. But then depending on my overlap with that character, then things may go a little differently. I mean, I'm obviously always reading the material just to get it kind of into my system, and kind of sometimes when you just read it repeatedly, things just seep in, you know, if you have the time, which is a luxury. Sometimes I don't have the time. But there will be some roles where you just have more of a natural affinity toward that role because you have, you know, maybe more similar experiences, and there are others that you don't. And so I still think even those ones that are seemingly a stretch, when they're all said and done and people see them and they're like, oh, that was so different from how I experience you in life. My thought is like it has to have some kind of, there's got to be something in me that's similar underneath all the external things that's similar to that character for it to resonate with audiences. And kind of the funny thing about, I was telling you, I've gone back to these, you know, Sanford Meisner on acting, which I read like, you know, when I was living in New York first year, like in the late 90s. And I listened to it on tape like a week or two ago, and it was kind of cool to listen after that much time had gone by. And then I just listened to the Esper one, and I hadn't read that before, but they were saying things. So I was given this information a long time ago.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Some of it I either forgot or forgot exactly how it was put.
Yeah.
A lot of it I've been doing
right.
without being
realizing
completely conscious of it.
Right.
And then some of it I also found like, oh, you've gotten lazy in some things. You've gotten too quick as a result of, you know, the reality is, you know, I've been very fortunate in the last couple of years where I've had more time with material, and I've had like a whole season's worth of scripts before we started filming. So I kind of, you can approach it more like a play or a movie where you know where you're going.
Right.
But a lot of the work that I did a little while ago, it was like you're going in for an audition for like a guest star, and you're shooting it pretty quickly. And so you rely on things, you know, maybe the most important thing was always like, how can I be alive in the scene, and how can I really be listening and reacting off the other person? But you kind of, that speed.
It's almost like shortcuts, like
that lack of preparation. I think you can lean on certain things, and when you look at your own work, you can see tricks and you can see things that you did that like maybe because of time you had no other choice. Yeah. But you know, you had to do it. But it can also lead to habits that are less than what maybe, you know, I'm striving to do now.
Right.
You know?
Right. Isn't it funny that you can be doing it as long as you've been doing it, and there's still so much room for improvement. I mean, there's nobody that has sat down here, man, and said that they got this.
If anybody says they got it,
Defoe didn't get. I mean, you know, nobody's sitting down and saying it's amazing, and it's amazing that you can keep going back and like somebody like Josh Hamilton, who is like just such a student always. He loves the podcast and is always keeps on just like dipping in. The newest book comes out, he gets it.
Yeah.
Bro, you've worked with everyone. You've been on Broadway. You've been, you know, on all these big movies. Like, you know, haven't you like chilled out and just no, it's not.
But I think that's the curiosity that's what makes him so good. It's the curiosity. It's like the humility to go like, no, I don't have this. I'll never have this. I'll be, you know, going to the grave and I'll still be looking for it. Or I'll have it for like a second and then I'll lose it and then I got to find it again. Or I'll have it and then I'll do something else and it'll get tweaked and it'll be a little different. Like I think that's just the nature of life, and that's the nature of this craft. And I think a lot of things are that way.
Yeah,
You know, there's
yeah.
like there's levels of understanding, and then there's like, you know, you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
You know, it's never like, maybe part of the job is that letting go when you don't it doesn't go the way that you hoped. You have a less than enthusiastic day or whatever, you know, you come back and you're like, ah. And part of it's like, you got to go like, okay, let it go. And we come back tomorrow and we hit it again. And if we didn't feel good about what we did, then we're going to do better this time.
I went back and watched your first scene as Cousin Brian in The Sopranos. I forgot about that character. I mean, I watched every Sopranos as they were coming out. And I was looking critically at it, man. I wanted to see a young, naive actor. I wanted to see a crack. I wanted to see a guy shaking in his boots sitting next to James Gandolfini and Edie Falco. I didn't see that. I really didn't see that. You were. It's not a, you know, you're not getting killed by him or beaten up. It's nothing big.
Yeah.
But you had a poise and a reality, and I think that's why I didn't remember the character, because it didn't seem like you were acting.
Oh.
It felt like the guy, you know, Cousin Brian, like everybody. And in your wonderful book, you write about getting that role, getting there, and it seems like it was such a huge moment, such a huge role to land, and so much pressure. I feel like some people believe that they're not good until they make it. I think that maybe most people have it or don't. And you can see it even when they're in their juvenile phase, in their first roles, in their first big roles.
Yeah.
I mean, do you believe that? How much of a different actor are you right now from that? For real? Like, you can say you've learned so much, but how?
Well, that's what I'm saying, where that's kind of the contradiction that I'm talking about, is like, so that was, you know, that was in 2002, right? So that's a long time ago. And yet, at that point, I had been studying and doing, you know, black box theater and independent films, like, you know, for free, and student films and all that stuff. So I had some miles on the road, and I was in scene study classes all the time. So it's not like I was a complete neophyte, but it was the first, like, kind of, I'll put it in quotes, real job I had, in terms of, you know, that kind of changed things a little bit. That's kind of what I'm saying, is that when you listen to a book and you go back, or if you think about child actors, it's like, all we're trying to do is, all the classes and all the theory and everything, all we're trying to do is get back to the place where we can buy ourselves as this character in these circumstances and go. That's kind of like, if you really boil it down. So yeah, I felt in that role. Now, here's another thing. The writing on The Sopranos was great. The other actors on The Sopranos were great. You know, it was James Gandolfini and Edie Falco. It doesn't get much better. So, you know, a lot of what was happening for that character, if you talk about a jumping off point, it's like I was the kind of wet behind the ears cousin coming in to take over the finances for this, my cousin's husband, who was this mobster, and I didn't even really know what he was up to at that point. I just knew something. And me, Matt, I was, you know, wet behind his ears actor coming on to the greatest show on television with James Gandolfini.
That's true.
It's not that hard to find the parallels.
I know,
between...
but I just have to tell you, because I just saw the scene. maybe I'm nuts, but you weren't just you didn't just lean on the wet behind the ears thing. I felt like you were like this awkward part of the family. I felt like you were yes, you were a little intimidated by these people in the same way that a cousin would be intimidated. Like I was looking for a thing to find in there where it's like, oh, this is young Matt Del Negro. Wow, look at him, he's grown so much. But I'm just saying that there was something, you imbued that with something other than just leaning in on that, because that would have been what anybody would do to survive the scene.
Yeah.
Unless I'm just totally crazy and seeing things that aren't there.
I think, there was something when that audition came through. I remember it was like a bunch of financial jargon. And I happened to have, I bartended in a place that was all, it was a lot of Wall Street guys came in and drank there. I went to school with a lot of guys that went down and were on Wall Street. My brother ended up being in finance. Like it was a world that I could hook into the language of what I was doing. And then I, obviously then was kind of like studying all of that with the financial planner part of it, so I knew what I was talking about. And so I don't know, I think I had a take on that character, I guess. Yes. And that's what I'm talking about when you go, a character can overlap with you in some way, and maybe that's what it was. It was this guy who was straddling two worlds. Yeah. And I feel like, I guess every character is kind of straddling two worlds in some way, but I've thought of a lot of the roles I've had in my career, they've straddled two worlds. He was innocent, and he had an attraction to the dark side of what Tony was doing, because he quickly devolves as the season goes on, and he's getting wasted, and he inadvertently gets Tony involved in a HUD scam, and but then he's kind of like, he gets a watch, he gets an expensive watch, but then he's afraid to go that far. So I think if you talk about the jumping off point, that was my jumping off point, maybe with that, because I straddled the world of coming from, being an athlete in college and then being an actor. And like I said, all these guys that I know go on and do finance, and I'm the guy that's serving them Guinness at the bar because I'm an actor. Yeah. So I was caught between worlds in a way.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. The idea of being an athlete and how that helps as an actor is something that I have been circling around, and then when I read it in your book, where you talk about it a little bit more, it really hit me. I was like, wow, there's something about, maybe it's the connection to your body that is necessary between the body and the mind, particularly in plays, this endurance thing. Being not so much an athlete right now, do you still pull from whatever that was in your acting work? Like, it was something instilled in you as an athlete that you're still pulling from right now in the work?
Just to qualify it, yes, I was an athlete, but the truth is, I don't feel like I'm particularly a natural athlete like some of the guys that I grew up with. I felt like I was a really hard worker who really cared. And so the athletic background, I think, is a dual-edged sword, and it's really good in some ways, and there are some ways where it could be a detriment, which I'll tell you in my mind. I think the biggest positive is kind of in that mindset of, my varsity football coach in high school used to say, like, you'd be there in August for double sessions in what we call the pits, and it was like dust coming up, and your nostrils are all there. You'd go 3 hours in the morning, you go home. I would go home and eat like a pound of pasta, and then you come back and in a couple hours, and you'd have your second session. You'd be there, in the heat of the summer, and he would always say, it's like, these are the it's this that you're drawing on when you're in end of October and November and it's cold out and you're at the end of the season. It's this stuff that makes you a champion. It's not the stuff that happens right there on game day. It's what you put in. So I think in that way, the mindset and also of kind of getting knocked down and getting back up, that's been really helpful because I have been knocked down just repeatedly in the business, as everybody who's listening, who's an actor, feels that in some way, shape, or form. So the mindset is great. It's like that kind of grinder mentality. On the other hand, I have had to learn to lose that in some ways, where if you're always muscling it and grinding, you can be missing out on the advantages of what it's like to take a breath, what it's like to daydream, which is all imperative for an actor. Like you need to not have a linear agenda all the time, or it'll end up being pretty narrow. You know what I mean? So it's kind of this battle within me of like the part of me that goes, I'm going to do this, and this, and then the part of me that says like, maybe you're going for a walk and listening to something. Maybe you're, doing things that are seemingly not giving you progress, but that is what you need. You need to, I've had to almost undo some of that background in order to let some of that stuff in. Again, you talk about straddling between two worlds. I always think if some of the people that I'm friends with in my life saw what we do in like some of like an acting workshop, like with Kim, she does dream work. It's Jungian dream work where you're bringing in dreams and you're pulling stuff up and you're, mat work really. I always feel like I have two very different sides of my life. And so it's this kind of yin and yang, and that athletic mindset works for part of it. I think it works for survival in a really rough business, but it doesn't work always for the artistic side and the soul side and the language side that needs to exist kind of without time and boundaries and is more on the emotional side of things than the physical pushing.
How do you handle this new kid at school phenomenon of being dropped in as a guest star to a show that's been going on for a while, or even if it's just the first season, but people are in their groove? I've talked to some actors on the show about this whole thing. It's almost crippling some actors of just getting there, and that aspect of it that has nothing really to do with the work, but it has to do with like politics and sociability on the set. Like, you're a nice guy. Like, is that what you do? Do you try to be friends with everybody? Do you try to keep your distance until they want, to talk to you? Like, how do you navigate? And has that changed over all these years?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. And it's definitely, again, you go back to that mindset. And you go back to the dual-edged sword of that ability to be adaptable, to know my role on a team, to deal with multiple types of people, to, have the savvy to figure out what the environment is before figuring out how I'm going to negotiate it, because each set is its own animal, and it depends on, some of them are toxic and some of them are great. It depends. But I think I had an ability to just kind of walk in, figure out, get my space, and perform in that environment. That's good up until a point. And what you're talking about Messina before, well, we would jokingly call me the recur, because I would come on to a show and it was supposed to be like one thing, and then I would just go for a long time.
They would like what you did and have you come back. Yeah.
And I think that was a combo of things, and I think it was helpful. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm done doing this. I want to be on my own thing. I don't want to just keep being a guest on other people's sets. And then we kind of, with my team and everything, kind of made decisions of like how I had to, say no to things, and then have a specific idea of what I wanted to do. But when I was really doing a lot of that, I think, that stuff is, it has a lot to do with, there were like two things. There was acting, and then there was this whole other thing. As I say, it's like an acting class is the most pure form of acting. And then when you work on TV or film, it's like taking that acting class and going up to a building here in Manhattan and being on the 80th floor when it's being built, and it's like doing that acting class on steel girders with like pulleys, swinging by you, and like that's what it's like. And so you need to figure out how to do your work in this new environment. And I guess I was able to do that, and so I got work, and then it would expand, and then I feel now the last few years it's been nice because I've been kind of on shows.
So this whole conscious attempt to transition that with your team worked in a way, right? And I'm sure that they wanted this to happen because it means more money for them, because they want you to be on a show. But are your people generally amenable to these kinds of requests, or are they just like, no, you can't say no to anything right now?
Yeah, no, they were. I felt like I had limitations in my own head that were holding me back, and when I consciously took them, I said, I want to take you to lunch. I want to tell you what we're going to do. What happened was I had a really very busy year that was, I couldn't have worked more that year. And I got to the end of it and thought, like, this was really good, but if this is it, like, I can't do much more. And this isn't, I don't think this is enough right now.
Yeah.
And so I said, I have to, hold my bullets more and be more
that's a good
targeted.
analogy. Yeah.
And so they said, you're going to work less. You're going to have to say, no, you're going to, in the short term, it's going to reduce the amount of work. But that was a conscious decision. And it did require me to sit through some lean times. But then ultimately, I ended up doing Goliath. And that was such a great experience because, the whole cast and the material and Larry Trilling, who was the showrunner, was just so collaborative and so empowering. It was such a great experience. It was season 2. And
Mark did a lot of great scenes with Mark Duplass.
Yeah, he was
really funny stuff.
Yeah. And that was a great experience. And then Huge in France after that was an incredible experience. And like, did you see that?
I see. That's why I wanted to sit down with you. When I saw that, I was like, all right, this guy. I'm shocked that they didn't give that another season. You must have been. Wait, we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because my 2 favorite times when I punched the wall was when I was like 13 when the Pittsburgh Steelers lost, which is embarrassing.
Yeah.
It was regular season. And my father made me patch the wall. And I did an amazing job. I patched the hole. So I learned something from that. Then the next time, I didn't punch a wall. I threw a plate through a wall, and I had to patch it again. And because of that first patch job, I was able to patch this. And unfortunately, though, that was not that long ago, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was with my wife. And that's embarrassing. And I'm bringing that up because you very courageously and appreciatively, I appreciate this, detail this moment in your life when you punched a wall and really fucked up your hand.
Yeah.
And that was only 3 years ago. And it was around this time what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that we're talking about after you coming off a great year and then coming off a great season of something, you can have that much anger. I want to just talk about that moment.
I don't know if it was career-wise anger and frustration, although I think that was part of it. I think ultimately it was this feeling of, and also some things precipitated that were kind of nothing to do with this business. But overall, if you boiled it down, like if you were doing this as a scene, you were doing that scene where this guy punches a wall, by the way, a stud in the wall.
Yeah,
so
that's
it didn't require patching. It just required a cast for me. I think it was almost a feeling of like, and it's so juvenile in a way, but like I'm coming for them. And that sounds, but it's kind of a little thing that I think I do, which is like again, it's probably embarrassing on an interview, but it's like this, just a chip on my shoulder that I'll put on and say, like, you have not seen me do anything yet.
Yeah.
I've not scratched the surface, and I'm still coming. And it was almost more of that energy, but really dumb. And the consequence was, I was, in a cast and going to my, couldn't have a catch with my son, and like, going around town and people going like, oh, what'd you do? And I considered lying about it. And then I just said, like, I punched a wall. And I just said, fuck it. I'm just gonna, I need to own up to it. And ironically, it's like the universe gave me such a great gift a couple of months later, because that Jason Allen Ross was like, I mean, I couldn't have prepared for that role really any better than the embarrassment of going through, wearing a cast on my hand for like 6 weeks, Yeah. And so that role, and I believe, or at least from, what the writer directors told me, and I believe this to be true, I think the reason I got that role was because it was really funny material, really funny. I mean, I was dying laughing just reading the script. But underneath it, there's a real sadness and a real desperation and frustration, and I really, that's where I hooked into it. And they just said nobody that came in. They said there was nobody that came in, which is kind of almost surprising, but maybe they're just saying that's what you say. But they said nobody really came in with that take on it from the first audition, and then I had to go through multiple, rounds of it. But I saw that, as funny as that whole show was, and as funny, what I thought was brilliant about their writing and their direction. I just think those guys, Andy Mogul and Jared Paul, are hysterical. But what I loved about it was like the underbelly. Like, they captured something. I was able to laugh at myself as an actor, and then I was also able to it was also like a guy with such a big heart, and he cared so much, and he just wanted. And so that whole moment of that spring of punching a wall and being an idiot really was what I needed to just kind of open up to when I played that role. So it was exposing to play that role. Everybody would think it was funny, and I'm like, oh God, I feel like I'm exposing myself.
Made it funnier, though. I think that's what made it more interesting. I mean, look, Dylan Galula last week said, "There's nothing that can happen to an actor that they can't use."
Totally agree.
And there's somebody listening to this right now, man, that maybe didn't punch a wall, but they're in that
They
moment.
weren't that idiotic.
They're-
and they punched the wall when they were like 45.
But they're in that place.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like next week you're going to get a role and you're going to be able to exercise that in that, but I'm just saying this is the profession where whatever's happening, you can use it. I know that that's a cliche that actors say.
Can I say something else to that same person who's listening?
Yeah.
Here's the other funny thing about that one. That audition came in, and that character was written as a 30-year-old, blonde, buff, blue-eyed, like a young Brad Pitt kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, and I was like, I just looked at the character description, which if you're listening, like, don't look at the character description. You know what? It's you in these circumstances. How about that?
Yeah.
But when you looked at that, it's like, oh, they're never gonna cast me.
Yeah.
But then the material was so good, and the material got under my skin so much that it was just like, okay, well, this is an opportunity to go in and do my thing with it. They may not give a shit what my thing is,
Yes.
but that's what I'm going to give them. And it did turn out that eventually they were like, oh, yeah, we'll go with that. You know, it was not what that character description was,
Yeah.
but there was something deeper that I connected with in that character. So if you are listening, you're like, you know, you don't cast yourself out of the role. They'll cast you out of the role enough. And I tell myself that because I've done that over the years. Oh, they're not going to want me. They're going to,
Yes. And you said something before that I wanted to stop you, but it pertains here. And you said, basically all we're doing is we're just trying to get back to the point where we believe ourselves in the role. And that's what a lot of people may think the whole thing is about making them believe that you're the role. No, it's about you believe. That's especially the first step.
Yeah, because if you believe it, they're gonna believe it.
Yes.
And that was another thing with that character, that was, just to go back to the question you had before about the athletic and the physical side of things. That was the other thing. His physical external look was kind of, I thought, imperative to pulling that character off.
Yeah.
He's always in the gym with his stepson, and he's always not even stepson, but he's like a peacock, and he's waxed, and he's this and that. And I thought I maintained myself in decent shape, but I was like, oh, I'm not in that kind of shape. And I called a friend of mine in the fitness world, and I just went, I had literally had 22 days before this sequence of these various sex scenes and scenes where I'm shirtless and all this. And I just said, how do I do that? And that work, the physical, the eating regimen, and the workout thing that I did, and it wasn't really that long of a time period, but that fully fed the character. I mean, there were things that happened
that's interesting.
as a result of my wife in real life. Was just to give you an example, I was cooking chicken breasts. I would have on our grill, 15 chicken breasts that I'm cooking, because I would do all of the cooking in the beginning of the week, and I could only have chicken breast and steamed spinach
Portion it
and
out.
avocado, one avocado per day, and whatever it was. And I kind of got so obsessed because I had this specific target to hit, that at one point our friends invited us over to their pool. And I was putting everything in these little Tupperware containers, and I'm like, oh crap, we're gonna go there. It's gonna be awkward because they're gonna do this, but I really have to stick to this. So I literally took the container and stuffed it in the bottom of our beach bag, and we're going over, we're about to leave, and my wife picks something up, and she sees the thing, and she's like, are you kidding me? You're not gonna bring this to their house, and you're gonna eat your fucking chicken and breast over there? And I was like, I gotta do this, and literally that is in the show.
Whoa.
That there were scenes in the show where that dynamic, and so again, that's like what we were talking about originally, which is what's your jumping off point.
Yes.
For me with that role, it was kind of the wall punch and the frustration, but then where do I get to this? How does the other work get me to this character too? And even just that activity and that regimen got me to the point where I could believe myself as this guy who was, so self-involved about his eating and his shakes and his all of this stuff that I could buy it.
A few years ago, I went to see my friend in a play. I went the very first day. And then I went back for a specific reason on the very last day. The very last day, the actors were really proud and happy. And they thought that they got this. I heard them talking. They finally got the pace, and they were like, "We finally got it. Now it has to end." And I thought it was fucking shit.
On the last day?
On the last day.
Interesting.
So much worse than the first day. And they had thought that they got it because of the pace, the whole while it was done so fast, and there was no meaning to it. And in your book, you talk about sitting down with Sam Rockwell when you guys were reading American Buffalo, and he stops at a certain point and he says, "We have to be careful with a play like this. The danger is letting a play this good make our choices for us. Fighting that temptation to spit it out fast so it sounds good." And I thought this was really perceptive of you to hear this from this great actor, put it in this book. Then I was relating to it. I'm like, all right, this is something that I don't think a lot of people really talk about, though. This idea of you have to lock into this pace. You have to, once you lock into the pace, it's easy. I don't act, Matt, so I don't know. I'm fascinated by you people. This whole idea of losing the reality of the thing because you're locking into a pace, it seems like it's so potentially misleading in terms of like just the way he puts it here.
Yeah.
Like being tempted to lock into this and thinking that you, quote, got it because you're locking into the pace. What do you think of this? I mean, you wrote it down. It must have hit you somehow.
Well, it hit me because, one, he's so great, and Messina was it was at Chris's house, and he and I have had. It's like I can't do this interview with you and not mention Messina because he's such a part of me as an actor. He's people respect him and love him out there, but they don't even know the half of it with his just. Ripping things apart, putting them back together. I'm very lucky with that friendship and in that how it's fed me. And the thing with Sam saying that was, I had done Speed the Plow.
Right.
We did it at ACT, and that was, Mammoth. It is, and when you don't have a ton of time to rehearse, it is tempting, and I'm sure we fell into that trap in some ways. I'm sure I could go back and look at that and be proud of some of it and also go like, oh, I wish I had, you could have like 10 years with Mammoth and still not, you could kind of get underneath those moments better and who's that character and what's he going through. And what's interesting for me is between Speed the Plow and then West Wing and then Scandal, all of those have a certain style and a certain rat-a-tat-tat pace to them.
Sure.
So you kind of have to get on the train eventually.
Right.
You're getting on the train. But the danger is getting on the train and not really
thinking that's it.
Yeah, that's not, if that's the whole thing, I think you're going to be missing a lot of colors. And I'm sure, by the way, that I'm guilty of it as well. But I think with anything you're doing, whether it's that or it's not something that's that stylized, hopefully you're ripping it apart and slowing down and kind of examining underneath the hood a little bit before you put it back together.
Right.
You know, and if you just lock into this thing, then what's the difference between that and, like, I don't know, what would be the analogy? It's like if you have nothing underneath it, then it's empty in a
Yes.
way.
Yes.
And
I feel like that's what this play was in the end. Shocking that they can go through an entire run and lose it, and not only lose it, think they got it.
Well, that's what I find more fascinating about that story is it's a good thing for actors to hear. Sometimes it feels good and it's not good.
Yes.
And sometimes it doesn't feel good and it actually is good. And I think that has something to do with maybe people have a desire for some kind of certainty or some kind of feeling like, we got it. Like, even that thought of we got it, it's like, well, you know, I'm thinking of one of my first teachers in New York, Terry Schreiber, used to say to me, and this, talk about unlearning some, you know, habitual things. He used to say, don't be such a straight A student. We don't want to see the guy that has it all together.
Yes.
We want to see the messy, underneath parts of where you're confused, where you're lost, where you don't know exactly what you're doing. You know, where you're not quite where you want to be. That's what we go to the theater to see. We don't go to see you have it all put together. And maybe what you saw on that last performance was these people that were like, yep, we crossed all our T's, we dotted all our I's, and here it is. And you're like, yeah, but I don't give a shit about it because I'm not led into that process. Whereas maybe the first night, they were struggling for something, they were searching for something, and you were
It's
able...
more alive. Isn't that funny?
The audience is able to participate in a way, and it is uncertain, but uncertainty is good because uncertainty is what life is.
Yes.
So it's, I mean, that's what, going way back to, I don't even know if we were recording, but we were talking about how you could just be a student forever. That's why you could be a student forever, because you never have it. Like, you do have it, but you're always, it's always changing on you.
Yes.
So just when you think you've grasped it, it just kind of like goes through your fingers like sand, you know? And I think when people see a great performance, they're watching the person who, as it's going through their hands like sand. And that's what they love about that. Is that they don't quite, it's not perfectly resolved. It's not perfectly symmetrical. It's something else.
So you have a great podcast called 10,000 No's. You just wrote a book called 10,000 No's. Now, honestly, if I had seen this cover, this good-looking guy, it's called 10,000 No's, I'd be like, a fucking self-help book. How to overcoming your, what is it called? What's the subtitle? Overcoming
How to
overcome rejection on your way to yes.
On the way to your yes.
And let me tell you, people, I love this fucking book. Okay, I'm probably going to read it again. I read the whole thing. I'm going to read it again.
I can't believe you read the whole thing. I love that. I'm so impressed.
I swear to God, I read it on my phone though, so I need the actual book when it comes out. But so before the book was this podcast though, and I think the reason why I love your podcast, Matthew, is I feel like you're the same kind of host I am, or at least I want to be, and that's you seem to really be getting something out of these people you're talking to in a real way, and therefore I get something out of it as the listener. And it's not like doesn't feel like your job. It certainly isn't. You don't have to have this podcast. But I would really like to know, speaking to your actor self, okay, that creative part of it, because you interview some people that aren't actors, a lot of people that aren't actors.
Yeah, a lot of people.
But how is this feeding your acting self? How is this feeding that creative side of you, talking to people in this really deep way?
It's not that different than what you do when you're given a character. I sit down with people, so I know something about them. I don't know a ton. Sometimes I've read their books, sometimes I haven't, to be quite honest with you. So what I came to, and this was for sustainability and how I could, actually accomplish this while having a family and a career, was I'm going to do a little bit of research. A lot of times it was people that I knew or I worked with or I knew of them somehow. But I'm going to do that, but then I'm going to really listen. And I'm going to really ask questions and I'm going to be present. So it's been great practice in how do I really listen. And one of the biggest compliments I've gotten in like the little reviews and just from feedback on emails and stuff like that is that people have said, I feel like you're asking the question I was just going to ask that person.
Yes.
And that's just really listening. For example, this woman that was incredible, incredibly successful, but just an unbelievable story. Susie Batiste, who is the founder and CEO of Poopery.
Yeah.
And she was telling this harrowing story of her childhood and into her early 20s. And she said something and she said, some of these people do a lot of interviews. So they're telling their story over and over again. So she said something and then she said, and I was raped. And then she kind of went on. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second. You just said you were raped. Like, what was that? And stopping and really listening. And we went into a whole sidebar on that. And I think that's the same muscle as an actor. It's what Sam was talking about, of slowing down and really asking what's happening here.
Right.
As opposed to getting on the train and just going.
Yes.
And really that I would say it is totally fed me as a human. It's really why I started it, was just being kind of, kicked in the teeth a lot by this business. And I had come off of, I was working on Scandal and that kind of dried up. And then I kind of couldn't get arrested for a several month period. And I just said, like, I don't want to wait till somebody hires me to be able to do something myself. And so a lot of it was to kind of save my own soul and go, like, how do these people move on when they're stuck? And not just actors. I do talk to a lot of people in our industry, and I probably will veer that way now. I'm kind of, but I wanted to talk to, a wide spectrum of people. And I think that it's the same curiosity that you need as an actor. I've actually been doing it with my character now. As I'm here and I have more time, I'm looking at my character a little bit like, if I were there's only this little tip of the iceberg they give me that is in the show.
Yeah.
But what if I were interviewing my character, Chris Caysen, for my podcast? What would I be asking him?
That's interesting.
And then I started to think, well, really, that's not enough. That's only like an hour interview. What if I were doing a documentary on him? What would I ask then? I'd be asking, think about it. When you see a documentary,
right?
That's the same thing we need to be doing as actors. Like, where
following
they live,
him around everywhere.
Where did they grow up? What time period did they grow up in? What were their parents like? What was their relationship like? How'd they feel about money? What was he? What were their political leanings? What happened close to them growing up that might have been like a pivotal moment? What was the point where this You know, if he's the head of the gang unit now, what led him there? Where was he when he was a teenager? Did he always want to be a cop? These are all different questions, and that's kind of what I've been getting practice with real humans. So it's actually been really good for that reason. It really has forced me to be alive in the moment.
Yeah.
Listening, and it's also encouraged me to ask the right questions to try to uncover things, and I'm sure sometimes I do it better than others, but
I love it. I mean, I think it just feels like you want to be there with these people, and you're interested in them. There's an episode of your podcast where you talk about what you learned from writing this book. You mentioned something very interesting. You were talking about how it was so helpful to you to be able to trust that your story was enough, that your particular story was enough, and it helped you as an actor. And I was thinking that this would really help actors too. If they could tell their own story in this way, because that connection to your own story kind of goes back to what we first talked about in this interview, which is having a way to connect to this person that is through you. And it's almost like you were talking about how initially you were thinking, well, look, I haven't won these awards and everything. Like, who am I? I'm not at the end of my life. Who am I to write a book? But trusting that your experiences, your ups and downs were enough as a story, kind of locked you in to this storytelling aspect of you that is what actors do moment to moment when they're telling someone else's story. And I thought that was so interesting, and it was the particular thing that I loved about your book. If you were somebody at the end of their life, had quote unquote, all of the markers of success, like we're talking about awards and everything, I don't think it would be as interesting as this. The parts that you were hitting on, you're a working actor, and we're getting you at a particular point. Talk to me about how writing your own life, rather than focusing on these amazing people that you talk to, what did that do for your own confidence as a person delivering stories?
Well, you took it back to the beginning of the interview, and back then I was talking about Kim Gillingham, and one of the other things that Kim would say is that the root of all bad acting is that feeling that we're not enough.
Yes.
So we're always trying to overcompensate. And it's one of the things I love about your podcast is that you get these amazing actors that you sit down with, and every one of them on some level feels like they're not enough, or they're an outsider, or they're outside the group. They're not in the inner circle, but everybody feels that way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, writing, really it started before the book. It's the podcast itself really helped me to start to tell my story. And then that kind of led to people having me go speak at little, events. And then this woman that I know who's, she speaks and is very, very on top of that whole industry, said to me, you could do this. And I started writing my story in this way. And I remember, Messina at the time goes, I don't know if you may or you may not do this as like where you're gonna make money doing this, but just the act of writing your story, I think is gonna empower you in some way. And it was absolutely true. And the truth is that the book came from putting myself out there on the podcast, and one of my guests is a best-selling author who's written 22 books, and he introduced me to his publisher. So it came about in a very kind of strange way where the planets aligned, and then and here it is. But yes, it required me to kind of silence that critic in my head that was telling me, like, who the fuck are you to write a book? Like, nobody cares, man. That's what the critic in there is saying. And interestingly, that author, John Gordon, at one point called me after, like, the proposal. I'd written the proposal, I made the deal, and I was kind of about to start writing. He called, and I said something to the effect of, yeah, it's going to be kind of like my tribe of mentors. Tim Ferriss has this book, Tribe of Mentors. That's all of these little stories of all of his guests. And he's like, no. He's like, hold on a second. Tim Ferriss wrote Tribe of Mentors, but first he wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, which was his story. Yes. He's like, 10,000 No's is your story. You have to write the book that only you can write. And I was like, yeah, but I haven't won an Emmy and an Oscar and this. He's like, I don't care. He's like, I want to know what it's really like to get 10,000 No's. I want to go behind the scenes with you. He's like, you can have those guests' quotes and stories, which is what I ended up doing.
Yes.
He's like, they can kind of back it up, but it's got to be you. And that was scary, again, because it's exposing, it's vulnerable. You know, you brought some stuff up today that I'm like, oh shit, I talked about punching a wall, and we're going to talk about that on my Back to One interview? This is not what I planned, man. All these people have to know this.
You're nothing but a wall puncher.
You know what I mean? That's what's going to happen. But that bringing myself to it has it's helped. It's helped just the way. It's just kind of owning all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that helps. I don't know. In some way, I think that helps my acting, because isn't that what we're doing when we're acting? We're doing it through the form of another character.
Yes.
But we're exposing all these parts of ourselves.
Yes.
It's funny. I'm thinking of, I said to you that Jason Allen Ross character was maybe, one of the best characters that I've been given in terms of, like, just contradictory and all over the map. And yet, when you bring up, like, the wall punching, I would say is not, and now I'm really beating it like a dead horse here, but it's really not indicative of who I am as a person, but it's a contradiction. And and it's funny that the tendency for me is to go like, oh, that seems a little messy. That doesn't seem like what I want to present myself as. Yeah. And yet when I'm talking about this character that I played, and he was really all over the map, I'm like, what a great character. Isn't it interesting? Like,
Yes. Yes, we don't want to be.
But when it comes to ourselves, we just want to be like, hi, I'm Matt Del Negro, and everything's great. It's like, no, that's not the whole story.
I'm so great, I'm boring. That's what we want to be.
Yeah, that's really what it is. And that's what Terry Schreiber is saying. Don't be such a straight-A student. Yeah. Nobody wants to see that. That's not, you know why? Because it's not real.
Yes.
It's not real. That's two-dimensional. Nobody is that. I mean, that's, if you want to go back to the podcast and what I've learned, that's what it is. It's like people have, I sit down with someone, they've got all of these accolades. They're the CEO of this. They won an Emmy. They were whatever. They won an Oscar, whatever it was. That's this layer, this external layer. Now, who are you though? Who are you? Who is like where's the little kid inside you? Where's the kid that got knocked down on the playground? Where's the kid that that's what's interesting, is like seeing people negotiate their way through their life. Yes. To me, that's what it is. And I think that's what's interesting to me. I think probably why I chose this profession, because I'm interested in that. Like what makes people tick? you know? And it's just, as an actor, you get to not only ask them with your mind, but you actually get to jump into their bodies for a little bit and actually feel it physically, go through their world as if you were in their shoes. Literally, you know, walk in their shoes.
Right. Matthew Del Negro, thank you for finally sitting down with me.
My absolute pleasure, Peter. I'm very grateful that you had me on. It's cool to be on a show that I listen to, and I've gotten so much from this, from listening to all the other great actors you've sat down with, that it's an honor to just you know, sit down and
That's
get
so cool.
to, you know.
And now you've given back. Now we've gotten your leaf on the tree
Yes.
that we get to examine, man. How cool is that?
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.